Hi, friend. Welcome to A Water Connection, a space created to learn, connect, and multiply the power of a conversation to give visibility to the water industry. I'm Jess Borges, a passionate human who believes that you should increase your water curiosity. Welcome to this part 2 of episode 19. As you can remember, last time in part 1, we were chatting with Sheriden Morris, the managing director of the Reef and Rainforest Research Center. We had a conversation in which we are learning about the importance of the water quality in the Great Barrier Reef. Back in that conversation in part 1, Sheridan wonderfully explained how the Great Barrier Reef is so big, so important, and so complex to manage as an important region for Australia. So keep listening to this part 2 of the episode where we dive a little bit more into the water quality aspect of it and how and what are the ways that we can manage this. So tune in, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of my conversation with Sheridan. My next question was about how does that cooperation work, maybe in the realms of the water quality. We have our industry, I guess, our industry parts in land that they are have certain practices that end up having an effect on it. Can you talk us a little bit about how that cooperation has worked?
So the water quality story is probably how I'll tell it.
Yep.
First, water quality issues were being brought to the table and spoken with the grazing industry and the sugar industry and the horticultural industry, bananas and tropical industries and other horticultural products, and some cotton and others. And there started a big discussion. The initial response was, it's not us, and we don't believe it. And so that went on for quite a lot of years. And so it was quite, an us and them style situation. Then out of frustration, there were quite a number of packages and financial packages that came along to help assist farmers adjust and improve their on-ground, on-farm actions to help improve water quality. There was a very strong focus on reducing sediment and reducing nitrogen in particular out of the farming communities, and the sediment principally out of grazing catchments. That, again, whilst there were small gains in places, and it really didn't get much momentum. And the reality is, even now, when we've spent over $2 billion, $2 billion plus on water quality on the Great Barrier Reef catchment, our outcomes are somewhat modest in terms of reducing loads into the Great Barrier Reef. So somewhere down the line, and there was some frustration, so there was the introduction of firstly farm best practice, and that was initially piloted purely through the representative organisations, and they extended that information. It was negotiated, and they extended that information out to farmers. And some farmers at the top end of the bell curve took that on really well. The majority of farmers did adjust some practices where it was to their benefit to do it, like green cane harvesting. The technology changed, and they adjusted some packages, like better fencing and cell grazing in the cattle industry and other factors. But even though those factors came into play, we did get some improvement, but possibly not enough to actually impact downstream effects. So the consequences actually went a bit further than that now, and the state introduced regulations. And those regulations actually ask farmers to identify and work to best practice. That has had some impact, but it also had a us and them style policing impact, which was really quite negative. It took a lot of work to start to get over some of those things. The regulations are pretty necessary because you've got to have a baseline, but they didn't shift the dial, surprisingly, that much. You thought when you brought in regulation, everything would have been sorted. Well, that didn't shift the dial that much. So we still, while the regulations are important, we still have very modest outcomes. So then we have to start thinking about, so we try to convince everybody with carrots and and doing a lot of science and showing people the science and stuff, but that didn't really jump over the line. So then we went to regulating and tried really hard, but that actually didn't shift it that much. So now we've got to think of, what do you do next? Because we do have to solve this. We can't just leave it, particularly in the face of climate change. So there's a lot of work that's been happening and some quite good innovations happening now. A lot of it revolves around co-development and changing some of the approaches. And this is my personal view now. It's not the government's view, but I actually think we needed to change it completely. So about 6 or 7 years ago, we started to introduce some new technologies. And this is technology where we had real-time sensors that initially came out of Germany and then had to be converted to work in tropical, very harsh, difficult tropical conditions. So you didn't have a piece of technology you could buy off the shelf. You actually had to maneuver and amend that technology. And we worked through James Cook University and others through the National Environmental Science Program. And we called this project Project 25 because we did, which is really clashing with the American 2025 at the moment, which we find. But anyway, we'll leave that alone. And and that actually censored up an entire catchment just south of Cairns. And along with that, CSIRO brought in telemetry and an app on the phone for farmers. And when it was raining and when it was going, farmers could see exactly what was coming off their little area, their little region, every 10 minutes. So suddenly it wasn't somebody else's problem, it was theirs.
Exactly,
How do
they
you
can see
personalize it? How do you bring it back to somebody? Because when it was a generalized statement, nobody had to take individual responsibility for it. Mm-hmm. Those who were broad thinking and, as I keep saying, at the top end of the bell curve, they got it. But the majority said, not our problem, sweetheart. So
it's not
how
me.
do you make it their problem? And so this personalising pollution loads coming out started to change the agenda significantly. Well, it really did. So no longer could you just be there. The other thing it did is you could see what's coming out of your area, but you also could see what's coming out of other people's area. Or if it was your area and you didn't think it was you and it was your neighbour, you could go and have a word with your neighbour and you could chase the load back to exactly what drain it was coming out of. Changes the agenda completely. Interestingly, when it did that, other things started to emerge. And we went from just focusing on nitrogen and just focusing on those things to starting to go back to look at the whole catchment as one. Now, in the US and in Canada and Europe, they call it edge of field, where you can convince a farmer to go to a certain level of best practice, but even in all farmers doing best practice won't actually get us to the level we need to be. We have to get our catchments working again. We have to get our floodplains working again. We have to reduce erosion up on the in the grazing areas, significantly reduce erosion. And we were pretty lucky. Back in the 50s, there used to be a group called the the conservation field officers, and they would go around helping farmers reduce erosion. And I think they did more to protect the Great Barrier Reef than just about anyone did back in the 1950s. So that was pretty wild. That all went out of favour, but it has huge value, contour planting, strip farming, all those sorts of things on grazing country. So we need to go back to look at how to make our system, our environmental system, work like it's supposed to work. And this edge of field, we call it catchment management, they call it edge of field, where you look at reinstating pre-existing wetlands. You look at using the drainage systems, and you want them to work as drains at particular times of year, but other times you can actually hold water in them, you can do things in them. And say in the wet tropics alone, we have about 10,000 kilometres of drains. You can use those to effectively start to manage water quality. So this is where we use technology, we use engagement, and we go back to the core basics of ecological function. And the farmers are embracing that really strongly. The other thing we bring into that picture is the cultural values. Because with the loss of fish in the wetlands, with the loss of those things for the traditional owners, the loss of those cultural values are significant. So by actually traditional owners, farmers and scientists working together on the ground, you start to find really competent solutions. And you don't go away and do your science and then jump out and say, hoo-hoo, everyone cheer me
Here's
because
the
I'm
solution.
fantastic.
Yeah.
There it is. You actually work
Yeah.
iteratively and just keep improving and improving. So you can work with lowland grazing to reflood that into ephemeral wetlands during flood times so you have mechanisms that help farmers shift cattle, and then when it dries out again, they've just had their whole farm fertilised free of charge. You can
Yeah.
actually start to use the systems. You can put floodgates and aerators and sediment traps in the drains. You can do all sorts of things. You can strip farm and protect grazing country. So it's about being cleverer rather than just banging the drum and being ideological.
Yeah.
And a couple of the ways in is controlling feral pests and weeds. All farming communities suffer from feral pests and weeds. And we've found in this catchment I was talking to you about, we've found controlling an invasive fish, tilapia, in the drains has caught everyone's interest, and controlling
Yeah.
feral pigs, of course. Everyone wants feral pigs controlled
Yeah.
for a whole series of reasons. They want feral pigs controlled for biosecurity, for crop damage, for ecological damage, and et cetera, et cetera. So when you actually bring in a whole system of control, you get much better engagement. So you're not just poking someone in the chest saying, you're polluting, you're a water quality vandal. You're actually saying, let's work together to fix this catchment up. Different
Yeah.
language, different approach. And it's not kumbaya. It's not holding hands and dancing in the sunset. This is really hard stuff. This is, let's control the feral weeds. Let's get the riparian area functioning again. Put the riparian area back. Let's reinstate wetlands that have been just semi-drained and rubbish. Let's work the drains so they work properly. They function for farmers when they need them, and we can use them for other things when they're not. So we're blessed with being a very smart country, having very good science that can underpin it. And now we've got to actually apply that science through agricultural platforms. That's
Yeah, I
it.
guess is that I guess that the word that keeps popping up in my head is co-development. Is like don't come and solve your problem, and that happens sometimes. I work in engineering, we go outside for a while, we work on our solution, and then like here it is, and like in some of these very complex problems, that's just not going to be the way to work, because you have to bring the farmers along you with the journey. Like, okay, it's not, we all understand, or maybe you do, or maybe you don't understand exactly the effects you're having, but look at, if we work together, this actually could have a lot of benefits for you as well,
Yes.
and suddenly you're working together towards this similar objective.
So I know it sounds a bit boring, but it sounds a bit too, but it actually does deliver outcomes. And can I
Yeah.
say, the ecologists and the environmental ecologists and that need to work more with the engineers, because engineers alone are just hopeless in the ecology
Yeah.
platform. Sorry about that. And vice versa. Because the ecologists are saying, oh, we'll just do this all through. And you say, no, there are times when you need engineering interventions that can actually shortcut this system, and designed well will give you outcomes, whether it's salinity in the Murray-Darling Basin, whether it's any of those components where you could plant millions of trees. Half of them will die, but you can plant millions of trees and still not get the salinity under control as much as if you divert high saline water out of the system.
Yes,
So
that's
you
right.
just divert high saline water out of the system. So sometimes, so that combination of engineering smarts and, environmental and ecological understanding is where the future sits. And I know there's environmental engineers, but it probably needs to be meshed together even more
Yeah,
strongly on an operational platform. So
yeah,
you also need the people who can get out and work closely with farmers and convince them through this change. And by bringing in, pig control and feral weed control and things, you can actually seduce the farming community into transformational based agriculture. You can actually change that agenda quite significantly.
no, and I think this is a fantastic learning, of that storytelling that you're saying. Like, look, first we try to just show all the science and like show what they're doing, and like that didn't do anything. And then as you're talking about, I'm like, oh, I'm sure there are regulations there, and then you come and like say like there were regulations, but that didn't work that either. And then finding then the answer, and the approach that the region is working out is in that working together is extremely inspiring. I was looking at the RRRC 2023 annual report in preparation for this chat, just to kind of learn a bit more about what your organization does, so like the institution you work for. And they were talking about this Mulgrave Russell Regional Water Quality Program. I'm not sure if that's the catchment that you were talking
Yes, it is.
previously.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
okay, okay. I wanted to ask, like, well, some of the stuff I wanted to ask you already answered, like in terms of what are the learnings, and how to do it. But what is the role that the Triple RC plays in this kind of ecosystem of interactions?
So let me take it back. Talking about the story, which is a timeline story,
Yeah,
each stage was important as well. Regulations are really important. They triggered the agenda. Getting the science initially was important, even though most people didn't believe it. The one thing they don't believe is end of catchment, black box, you know, 2 years later, they tell you what's going on. People like real time stuff in real time place.
yeah,
The role of RRRC, we coordinate the science. So often, if and we sit in that interesting zone between policy, science, and the community, and First Nations people, which is a big part of our. So
absolutely.
we actually coordinate science. So the federal government gives us a bunch of money, and then we go out to scientists and we bring the best players together. They're often not they're not necessarily the people who have published the most. They're not necessarily, the big names. They are researchers that we know who can work on an operational platform and are game changers. Some of them, quite a lot of them are young coming up through the system, and some of them, and so it really promotes it's a cultural change in the science community as well. And, if you wanted to be, so it's sort of, we bring like a Manhattan project together, even though that had a disastrous outcome. It's that you bring engineers, you bring economists, you bring ecologists, you bring those players, social researchers together to answer a problem. And that's how come we had people out of Sorrow doing telemetry, and we had people, down monitoring water, we had fisheries experts, you have all those, because you need all those players
You
to
need
get
all
the
of that.
story right. And you see, often if you're just given to one thing, that a paper is published and that's fantastic, but I don't know how many people are sitting waiting for the bus reading entomology today. Like, it
That's
doesn't
right.
get to the community as well as what it needs to get to the community. So you actually need to bring those players together, and one thing I have learnt very strongly is science or engineering set apart doesn't drive change as readily, or it's such a long time before it makes its way through the system down onto the ground. Science being applied directly to the ground is the biggest, fastest way to make change.
Yeah.
And so we've made a real part of our policy, and it's RRRC's really main game, is how we bring high quality science down into the community
Into the
very
community.
quickly, very
Yeah.
quickly, and get the community engaged in the science. So here, farmers are seeing exactly what's going on in their own space in real time. It's pretty sophisticated science that was put on the table here. And when we say it like this, it sounds really quite simple and why doesn't anyone do it? But it took quite a bit to set this
No.
up, set the
Yes.
frameworks up, and then get it so it's believed. Because a lot of
Yeah.
science, remember, we've gone through this real anti-science period, and you will have experienced this, as will a whole lot of your listeners, where climate change was a lie, water quality on the Great Barrier Reef's a lie, everything's a lie, it's not happening, it's run by George
It's not
Soros and
that.
conspiracy
Yeah.
theorists, and like trying to get credibility on the ground back with the community, particularly a very suspicious community who feel they're being targeted and, falsely, who are up in arms about how that's happening. It takes real skill. That's a real skill in its own right. And being able to
Yeah.
do that and set the parameters so people believe and engage. I used to say, believe this is not a religion, it's straight down science. I used to get really frustrated at this. But the reality is they have to vest in it. They have to actually have
Yeah.
enough confidence in the information they're receiving that they can see with their own eyes, that they have control on, that is personalised, that allows you to go forward. And
Yeah.
10 years
Absolutely.
ago, we could never have done that. Now we can.
Yep. No, this has been really enriching conversation. I always have three last questions for all my guests, right? And I have them in a way where I'll adapt them for the conversation we have had. What do you think is the biggest challenge that this whole water quality in the Great Barrier Reef wicked problem is facing? If you had to summarize it.
Um, Biggest problem is getting change taken up in a timely manner. And that problem doesn't, and I'm going to get hung for this, but that problem doesn't only sit with the farming community, it also sits with government.
Yep.
And so government brings in a regulation, or it brings in an approach or a monitoring approach, and they set up their whole architecture around that. So they employ people who are good at that and that. And when you develop a single approach, you develop a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The problem is when that gets jumped over completely with a bit of new technology, and it's still sitting back there and can't adjust and
Let's do
can't
that. Yeah.
change, because you've got to change the whole architecture of a department. And nobody wants to do that, and it's really
Yeah.
hard. So it's very hard to move things forward very quickly. We have a privilege in the science community, we can bounce around on our pogo sticks, but government is a big liner that's hard to move
Yes.
quickly. And so that represents a challenge.
A
Uh,
challenge. Yeah.
the the other is, I think, appreciating the values of cultural understanding in the system, and there is value in that cultural understanding. And everyone gets a bit of rose-coloured glasses on with this, but I grew up in a mission in the Northern Territory, so I don't have rose-coloured glasses at all. But there are value components that can be brought through when you bring in cultural considerations and science. And that has challenges still around it, and one we're working really hard on. And I think, and how to plan and co-develop programs that actually consider all those
All
factors.
of that.
The other is how the science community is set up. Oh, I'm going to have a real shot at this. Everyone's going to hang me after this. Is how the science community is set up, that you're rewarded through publication, not rewarded through impact. And I think that's problematic. Your H
That is.
index and all that you're considered much more important and much more high value. Yet, if you're a middle career scientist, and you've actually gauged in impact work or applied science, often you don't shoot up the career ladder that strongly, even though
Yep.
your impact on the ground is fantastic. And some improved recognition of that, I think, would really help, and would help bring some of our tremendously good thinkers into the game much more
Into these
strongly.
kind of problems. Oh, I absolutely. I did. I come from research as well, and that was I can fully agree with that, and that was one of the reasons I decided to jump into industry to try to find that place where I can create as more impact, than what I was able to do through research. So you're
Do you
not the
want to
only
sit
one who
around
thinks
and
about it.
do you want to sit around and just monitor decline and then write papers about it, or do you want to get out and change it?
And change it
And
and actually do something
and
about it.
particularly these, not my generation, but the younger generation of scientists are passionate about making change, about driving change. So these avenues, somehow we have to have them valued much more highly. So I'm
Absolutely.
just putting that out there.
Yeah,
I'll get bombarded. You wait to see what happens after this. But it's
that's
real.
good.
It's real what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It's honest. So they're the big impediments. I actually don't think the farming community is the biggest impediment. And this will get me hung as well. Mortality is part of the management tool here. People, that older generation is moving past, and there is a younger generation who have been exposed to a greater range of thinking, and are often more open to adopting new
To
technologies
changes.
and looking
Yeah.
at alternative ways. So, and as farming gets really quite more sophisticated, you can't just stick your head in the sand anymore, because you've got to market, you've got to do all these things.
Yes.
Um, you're dealing with higher education, more open to new advances, etc. So I think there is opportunity there. Sorry, I'll get
Absolutely.
off my high horse now.
No, it's a good. You did mention early, just a minute ago, about young scientists, and young water professionals. Those are our primary audience here, like people that are in the water industry, maybe from another perspective or not other, like not necessarily this particular problem. But what would be your message for them that are listening to you like right now, to those young water professionals in the industry?
Um, Number one, don't be afraid, because you're terrified for your career when you start swimming against the tide. When you're looking at that, because you say, if I get ousted out of this, or I don't carry my professor's views, or if I'm looking for alternative innovations, no one's going to love me for that, and my career will crash and burn. Try not to be too afraid. Try to
Yeah.
find like thinkers who can think like you, and they're not necessarily in your own discipline. And that's the big. And also, when you jump across and work across disciplines, you have expertise that is of value. So don't be frightened about taking your expertise into other disciplines. And that's a big step to do, because you're corralled. The system actually corrals. You know this. You've been through it. Your system actually corrals you a bit, and you have to actually step back and saying, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
And so that takes courage, and it does take courage, and I don't underestimate that courage that it takes. But find a mentor, somebody who's maybe a bit more established and a bit more crazy, and is willing to help you find that avenue through, because they're of enormous value. And at the time, I had a great mentor, but when I was coming through this, at the time, you don't think it's very much, but then suddenly when you find yourself in a decision making position, or in there, you start remembering all the things that your mentor assisted you through. So find somebody who's got a bit of lived experience, that can help you in those areas. But don't be frightened of holding hands and dancing with other disciplines, because that's
Yep.
often a quick way to to move forward, a quicker way to
Yeah.
move forward. If that helps, if that's any advice.
Oh, that was really really inspiring. And
Because
just
you,
to wrap
you
up,
personally know
so
these things, don't you? You personally understand some of those things.
I see some of those from experiences that I have had, but and I think in my opinion, a career never really works looking forward. Like you have to be open to opportunities and open for those collaborations and jumping into new things. And then when you look back, it's like that made a lot of sense. Like, and that's something that I particularly personally am quite a bit of control and planning freak, and I've have to learn, like, with some things you just have to relax and listen to what is happening. And then when you look back, it just makes total sense. It's like, oh yes, I had to come to Australia to do a PhD, which is how I ended up here. Now it all makes a lot of sense once a decision that was really daunting and like really uncertain at that time. So definitely I can relate with some of those, but like those words are very inspiring.
And the other thing is, you will get knocked down, you will get stomped on, and being being a female, it's better than it used to be, but it used to be really tough.
Yeah,
And also, being a young male coming up through the system is pretty tough too. There's a lot of silverbacks running around. Those silverbacks are falling off the perch a bit now. So hopefully, when you go looking for a mentor, you'll find somebody who you don't have to corral into their system. They give you
yeah,
space to move and breathe. So look for that.
yeah, absolutely. And Sheridan, just to finish up, why do you work in the Great Barrier Reef? I don't normally ask why do you work in the water sector, but for you, like, why do you work in this amazing region?
Oh, look, I live in this region.
Yes,
I've spent my adult years in this region. I have an opportunity to work in both areas. We work in the rainforest, which is just amazing. For those who haven't gone to North Queensland's rainforest, you need to. It's
it's
glorious.
amazing.
It's fantastic. And then you can go straight out onto the reef. Attenborough thinks it's one of the most amazing places in the world. I would argue that was the case. It's winter, it's a blue sky out there. I should be out on the reef today. It's just glorious. And once you are captured by it, you cannot let it go. I will tell you. I know Australia is blessed with amazing natural capital. We have fantastic environmental scenes all around Australia. The reef and the rainforest are pretty special. I will say
Yeah.
that, and that's my chosen. And I've lived in the tropics my entire life. I don't know if I could go and live in the cold country again. Once it's that tropo madness that you get once you've come up to these areas, and you find it's very hard to go back.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Sheridan, thank you very much for all your wisdom and your storytelling abilities. I think it was amazing for us to understand a very wicked problem as you correctly catalog it, and making sure that people can understand what the drivers have been and what the journey has been and how every step has been useful for the place that we are at the moment, and of course looking ahead into those challenges. So, and for all those inspiring words at the end, like, thank you very much for joining us today, and for not being in the reef to being here with me talking in that glorious morning in Queensland, which is down here is quite cold in Adelaide, but yeah, really looking forward to go to Queensland soon.
Sounds wonderful, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm just hopeful that there are more young, passionate researchers coming through who want to commit to getting, to saving what is so magnificent and unique about Australia. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. And to you, my friend that are listening, thank you very much for tuning in and listening to this wonderful episode of our Water Connection. I hope you enjoyed this talk that we had with Sheridan. Follow us on LinkedIn as our Water Connection to hear all the updates and episodes coming. And you can hear us, as you know, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. Help us grow in this project, sharing this. If you have family or friends that have been in the reef, please send that to them to learn about this other layer of complexity and wonderful things that are happening in this region, and help them increase their water curiosity. And we'll see you next time.